Hey guys, it's Ryan J. I've had a lot of requests for this video, and since we've reached 2,000 subscribers, I thought now would be a great time to do it. That's right, for this video, I'm going to rank all story mode specimens in the original game of Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion from worst to best. This list will be entirely personal and opinionated, so your rankings will likely differ from mine. Also, these rankings aren't necessarily based on who's easier or harder to deal with, but rather based on who I enjoy more in the game. Specimen design, chase mechanic, chase theme, and the overall experience are all reasons and factors for the placements on this list. And remember, this list is exclusive to the OG version of the game, which is free on Steam and created by Akuma Kira. So without further ado, let's get this ranking started. Inspired by the game Resident Evil, this specimen makes it to the bottom of this list. Specimen 3, or as I like to call him, the Spiderpede, since, you know, it's a centipede that unfortunately ended up looking more like a spider due to the limitations of the Game Maker engine. And speaking of the Game Maker engine, that's pretty much the main reason why he's at the bottom of the list for me. It's not because he's a bad specimen, it's because of the fact that his mechanic is kind of broken in the original game. In fact, he's my favorite specimen in HD renovation, as he got a major buff with better animations that work really well. But in OG, he just sort of exists, and is the most forgettable specimen in my opinion. Specimen 3 is supposed to spawn from holes that appear in the ceiling. However, these holes don't always appear in every room of the chase, and he sometimes won't even spawn from them at all. Specimen 3 does have an awesome chase theme though, but everything else about the chase is just sort of mediocre.
Mediocre?
So that's why this specimen is at the bottom of the list for me. Specimen 1 comes in many different appearances as it springs out from the walls at random times throughout the game in order to startle the player. Specimen 1 also has many different sound effects, ranging from cute little sounds all the way to the most unbearable screeching sounds in existence. Specimen 1 is quite effective to a lot of first-time players of the game, and they can even make some of the toughest men scream like little girls. But for me, because I've played this game so much, I don't really pay attention to them anymore. They're more of just a nuisance and they get in the way, but I still love Sam the Pumpkin. I mean, just look at that face. Who wouldn't love that face? Next on this list is the very first hostile enemy you meet in the game, Specimen 2, aka Gel. Inspired by the Lub-Glubs from Adventure Time, Specimen 2 is relatively easy to escape from. In fact, he's even easier now ever since a new glitch occurred in the game a few years ago. In 2020, Spooky's creator Akuma Kira made some player performance enhancements to the game which were definitely needed. However, it somehow caused Specimen 2's green slime puddles to not be as sticky as they used to be. Before this glitch, the puddles would slow down the player, but now you can just easily run right through them, making his chase even easier than it already was before. Aside from being able to float over gaps and phase through walls, Specimen 2 is really no threat whatsoever, and the chase itself is pretty generic, which is why he's at the bottom 3 of this list. But he's still a pretty cool dude. Specimen 12 is inspired by the survival horror game Clock Tower. As we learn in Cat DOS, Specimen 12 is, in itself, Room 810, an old Victorian mansion that possesses a host, known as the Old Man, and uses them to attack the player. The Old Man is really what chases you during the course of the game, since in Room 810 you're pretty much just playing hide-and-seek with the Old Man. However, the Old Man himself is pretty glitchy in OG, and his pathfinding is, well, not the world's greatest. He may hit like a truck, but it's super easy to escape from him and the chase itself is pretty underwhelming. But I still really like the lore behind Specimen 12, and it's certainly not a bad specimen. When I first played the game, hiding from the Old Man was actually pretty tense, and I actually really enjoyed the sense of exploration throughout this giant mansion area. Next up, we have the final new specimen that we encounter before reaching room 1000, and that's Specimen 13, aka the Siren. Specimen 13's introduction room and chase are entirely inspired by the survival horror game Amnesia, more specifically Amnesia: The Dark Descent. After encountering her in room 910, we find ourselves having to swim from crate to crate, just like during the water monster chase in The Dark Descent. Although Specimen 13's chase is quite a bit more forgiving than the one in The Dark Descent. But just like the chase in that game, you're still able to see the ripples in the water from where Specimen 13 is swimming. So it's pretty obvious where the inspiration for this chase came from, and I completely understand why Akuma Kira wanted the final encounter to be something from Amnesia, because, well, Amnesia is a pretty terrifying game for a lot of people. But as someone who's never played Amnesia, I still like the chase a lot, and encountering her for the first time definitely made me pretty nervous. But as long as you're standing on a crate, Specimen 13 cannot attack. However, after a while, the mechanic of going from crate to crate starts getting a bit old and repetitive. And it is a shame that you only get to see Specimen 13 herself as a single sprite sitting on one of the crates, and that's it. The rest of the time, it's just ripples in the water. But then again, it's pretty much the same way in Amnesia. Specimen 13's chase theme is relaxing, yet has a mysterious feel to it. And while the chase itself is easy once you figure out what you have to do, I still think it fits well as the last specimen encounter before the final boss fight. Inspired by The Grudge and The Ring, Specimen 4, aka Ringu, makes it to the number 8 spot on this list. Her appearance is based on a character from Corpse Party known as Sachiko. We first encounter Specimen 4 in room 165, where we find ourselves holding a flashlight in the interior of an abandoned Japanese school containing various classrooms and shadow children. At the end of the hallway, Specimen 4 makes her first appearance from behind and starts chasing us. But there really isn't anything special about her chase other than the fact that she once again floats over gaps and phases through walls, even though she is noticeably faster than Specimen 2. I do really like her design though, and she's way scarier in Endless Mode, but that's a discussion for another day. I also prefer her old chase theme that sadly no longer plays, which is the one you hear playing in the background right now. Her current chase theme is perfectly fine, but I just find it a bit jarring at times. Otherwise, Specimen 4 is a pretty creepy specimen overall, and I love the references to her from various horror films. Oh, and the way she consumes us is pretty disturbing as well. Oh look, Silent Hill has entered the chat. At number 7 on this list, we have Specimen 5, also known as Bab in the game files. Why is she called Bab? Well, I haven't got a clue. And apparently neither does Akuma Kira. But more importantly, Specimen 5, or Bab, is heavily inspired by the Silent Hill series, especially Silent Hill 2, released back in 2001. Her appearance resembles the nurses and mannequins from the game, and the sword attached to her wrist resembles the great knife that Pyramid Head carries in Silent Hill 2 as well. But not only that, Specimen 5's fog and visual distortions during her chase were also inspired by the Silent Hill series. And her chase theme sounds like something you'd find right out of a Silent Hill game, even though it's a completely original track. So yeah, Akuma Kira just basically took the entire Silent Hill series and just smushed it all in one section of their game. Genius. So what do I have to say about Bab? Well, there's a reason why she's sort of in the middle of this list. For one, she's super slow. I mean, just look at her. I don't think she'll be winning a marathon anytime soon. And her expert pathfinding has given me quite a few laughs over the years.
Spain!
But her visual distortions are effective, especially to those who may be unfamiliar with the different room layouts of the game, as the exit door will sometimes blend in with the distortions, making it difficult to see where you have to go. Her chase can be headache-inducing to a lot of people, but I've never really had a problem with it myself. Specimen 5 would have been a bit lower on this ranking list, but recently I've made some cool discoveries when it comes to her chase, which I've posted videos of already. Because of these discoveries, my interest in her has only grown. But she is by far the glitchiest specimen in the entire game, as there are many texture glitches that can occur in the one room after her chase ends, including missing floors, missing walls, and even invisible doors. But aside from that, Specimen 5 is a pretty unique and fascinating specimen, especially from a design and ability standpoint, and she's got a pretty neat and poetic death screen as well. But I can't be the only one who thinks that her head looks like an almond. Congratulations! You've made it to the part of the game where you get to adopt your very own pet. Well, not really. But that's what it seems like with Specimen 10, aka the Parasite, as the Specimen's mechanic involves you having to take it for a nice little stroll through some of the longest corridors in the entire game, the dreaded long halls. Yep, these long halls only exist because of Specimen 10's chase. Go figure. Specimen 10 is inspired by the necromorphs from the survival horror game Dead Space, as well as the 1982 film The Thing by John Carpenter. We're first introduced to Specimen 10 in room 617, where a giant eel, which happens to be the old Specimen 10, is suddenly killed by the new Specimen 10. And from there, you've proudly adopted your very own personal strip of bacon who's ready for you to walk it through the mansion for about 24 rooms. Specimen 10's mechanic is very unique, as you can't get too far away from it or else it transforms into a much faster form. But as long as you keep it near you, the chase itself is pretty easy, just time-consuming, especially when having to deal with these super long room layouts. This is the part of the game that most people struggle with, simply because this type of mechanic hasn't been seen yet in the game, and most people find out the hard way that you can't simply run away. This is why Specimen 10 is all the way up to the number 6 spot on this list, since it has a pretty cool mechanic, but you just have to have patience with it. And Specimen 10's chase theme is one of my favorites in the game, simply because it gives off a sense of dread that fits perfectly with this kind of chase. The title of the track, Getting There, is pretty fitting, as you're trying so hard to get to the next save point in the game, but you can't because Mr. Bacon Strip needs a babysitter. Specimen 10's design is pretty disturbing, and if you happen to get too close to it, it'll open up its chest and reveal a not-so-friendly sight. But otherwise, Specimen 10 in the original game is not difficult to deal with, and it's not often you get to have a relaxing chill session with an enemy from a game. In fact, all those long walks Specimen 10 and I have had together over the years have been pretty memorable and enjoyable, and we've even gotten to know each other very well. And hey, we even jam out to the same kind of music. Okay, maybe not. If you thought Specimen 10 was unique, well, you've seen nothing yet. Specimen 9, or Taker as he's known, takes the prize for uniqueness, as he's completely different from anything else we encounter in the game. Why? Because you can actually encounter him in 3 different scenarios, despite the fact he doesn't even have his own special set-piece room like all the other specimens do. Of the 3 scenarios, only one of them is guaranteed, but the other 2 are not. And those 2 are only if you, well, screw up. Specimen 9 has 2 appearances, one being a skull form, which was inspired by a creature named Red from the NES Godzilla creepypasta. The other being a large humanoid form that you encounter after reaching room 1000. But his skull form will only appear in 2 different instances. The first one being if you happen to stand idle for more than 2 minutes in any room after room 50. Of course, this only applies to when a specimen chase sequence is not currently active. So let's say you have to go to the bathroom and you forget to pause the game. Well, chances are you're going to come back to this. After 2 minutes of standing idle, Specimen 9 will spawn from behind and chase until he either kills you, or you happen to make it to the next room in time. If you make it to the next room, Taker will thankfully despawn. In this scenario, he deals 60% damage, which means he's a 2-hit kill. And like I said, he can show up in any room you happen to stand idle in. Yep, even the elevator rooms where you save your game. The second instance where you can encounter Specimen 9's skull form is in a randomly generated room called the Endless Hallway. An exit door will always appear on the left side at the start of the room. However, if you decide to walk down this mysterious hallway with what appears to be a light at the end of it, you'll soon notice that the hallway is seemingly endless and just doesn't stop, and the walls will begin closing in, eventually trapping you to where you're no longer able to move. Then Specimen 9 himself will appear in the distance, rushing towards you and killing immediately on contact. The third and final encounter with Specimen 9, which is guaranteed, is the boss fight, where Taker appears in his humanoid form. The boss fight itself is alright. It used to give me trouble, but now it's pretty easy to me. But it's really not the reason why this specimen is ranked so high on this list. So what is the reason why Taker is all the way up at number 5 on this list? Well, aside from being completely badass, there are some solid reasons why I really like Specimen 9. Just like with what I mentioned earlier with Specimen 5, I've also made some pretty incredible discoveries with Taker, and they are some of my favorites of all time. My favorite being the one where you can have 2 Specimen 9s spawn in the endless hallway room if you happen to time it right. You can also get him to spawn just before triggering other specimen encounters. And he can even show up in some death screens. So yeah, he's a pretty sneaky dude. And for that reason, my interest in him has increased quite a bit over the last year. And I'm sure I still have much more to discover when it comes to this awesome specimen. At number 4 on this list, we have a specimen that I like to call the hidden gem of the game, simply because it can only show up once, and that's it. And that's Specimen 7. Inspired by the Wall of Flesh from Terraria, as well as Gygas's final form from Earthbound, Specimen 7 resembles a giant wall of distorted corpses that chases us from behind, eventually filling up the entire room if we don't make it out in time. The rooms that Specimen 7 chases in are very twisty and maze-like, with weird shifting images on the walls that are meant to distract the player. And believe it or not, these images are very effective to a lot of first-time players of the game. And since Specimen 7 is an instant kill, a lot of times these players have no clue how they even died.
What the hell is going on? What are these weird faces and symbols on the walls? Maybe I should touch it and see what happens. Nothing happened. WTF, how the hell did I die?
When we first make it to Specimen 7's introduction room in room 410, we find ourselves in a room that reminds me of something you'd see in Alice in Wonderland. Then you meet a mysterious but harmless white cat that gives you cryptic warnings about Specimen 7 itself. After exploring the various rooms within this area, Specimen 7 will begin chasing, and while it moves at a pretty slow pace and it's fairly easy to escape from, I still absolutely love this encounter, and the chase theme that plays is quite a jam to listen to. It's not necessarily scary or anything, but it gives off a unique vibe that all the other Specimen chase themes don't really have. It's definitely one of my favorite chase themes in the game. The only thing I wish Specimen 7 had is its own death screen, because sadly it lacks one. When you die to it, all you get is the game over screen, which is definitely a shame. But besides that, this specimen is one of my favorites due to its psychological build-up and epic chase theme. And the rooms it chases you in are also visually appealing. But not only that, Specimen 7 also has a life lesson. It basically teaches you to overcome your weaknesses, instead of dwelling on them and consuming you. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. And now onto the top 3. And it's the Dear Lord. You thought I was gonna make a Dear Lord, it's the Dear Lord joke, right?
Wrong!
But yeah, Specimen 8, or the Dear Lord, makes it to number 3 on this list. You know what? Let's get some of the small gripes I have with Specimen 8 out of the way first, and then we'll get into all the good stuff. And the first thing is, well, his chase mechanic is pretty bland, and nothing we haven't already seen in the game. Of course, this was fixed in HD renovation a few years ago when Specimen 8 was given a whole new terrifying mechanic where he'll just zoom right through the walls at lightning speed. But in the original game, his mechanic is just another Specimen 4. Also, in CatDOS, it says that Specimen 8 is effective against violent subjects. But last time I checked, no matter how violent we are towards him or his dear children, he still chases us at the same speed and does the same amount of puny damage. So the game lied to us. How dare they? Get it? Dear they? Well, there's the first deer pun. But anyways, enough of that. Now on to all the good stuff. And it's basically everything else about him, including design, chase theme, atmosphere, and even the build-up to his chase where we find an axe and encounter the violent deer, which are Specimen 8's so-called children. When we first meet Specimen 8, a static overlay will fill the screen, and an awesome static chase theme plays with the world's most incredible synth violin. Specimen 8 also has several creepy vocal lines.
Join us. Why do you run, child? Your submission is inevitable. Your flesh will sustain my children.
Deerlord's design is one of my favorites in the game, and his appearance was inspired by the main antagonist of Over the Garden Wall, known as the Beast. Specimen 8's lore and backstory are also very interesting as well, and some of it is even brought up in Akuma Kira's other popular horror game, Lost in Vivo. If we happen to die to Specimen 8, we are taken to a creepy dead forest area, where Deerlord himself will be waiting for us to join him and his tortured souls. After getting close to him, we get the following text displayed on the screen. Specimen 8's death scene is definitely my second favorite in the game, and it further confirms why he deserves to be in the top 3 spot on this ranking. Overall, Specimen 8 makes it pretty high up on this list, simply because he's just plain awesome, and I love him dearly. Okay, no more deer puns, I promise. Anyone hungry? Well, it's time to head to your local fast food restaurant and meet Specimen 11, known as the Food Demon, or as I like to call him, the McDemon. Hey, let's just be glad it's not Ronald McDonald. Specimen 11 is at the number 2 spot on this list for a variety of reasons, the main one being his introduction area in room 710, where we find ourselves in an abandoned fast food restaurant. Even from its appearance, I was quickly intrigued by this area because it gave off a liminal space vibe, especially with the whole abandoned restaurant theme. Specimen 11's introduction area was inspired by a level that Akuma Kira made in the game Little Big Planet called 100% Beef Court. We can see references to that on various posters throughout this area. But the creepiest part about this area is this particular room. If you've ever had the thrill of experiencing those germy indoor play areas inside a McDonald's back then you know exactly where this is going. And if you've never experienced them before, well, you're in luck, because that's exactly what we have to do here. After reading the fun rules, and acknowledging a typo that nobody ever notices except me, as well as taking our shoes off, and skulls apparently, we can then enter the fun zone and relive those wonderful childhood memories. Except, I don't think everything is all fun and games here. Once we find our way out of the fun zone and grab an exit key from the freezer, the McDemon himself will begin chasing us. Specimen 11 is once again another floater who phases through walls, but the gimmick with his chase is that he can make doors invisible, but we can still go through them. This can make things quite challenging for new players who aren't very familiar with the room layouts. But for an expert like me who knows these room layouts too well and can probably run through them blindfolded at this point, this gimmick really isn't a problem at all for me, but I still find it quite interesting and creative. Specimen 11's design is also pretty cool. It resembles a demonic red creature with an eyeless head and 2 large horns. While he moves fairly slow, he can suddenly speed up if he's near us and in our vision. His chase theme is titled, "We Have the Beef," which is a reference to Arby's slogan, "We have the meats." And I must say, his chase theme is quite a banger. Not only is it one of my favorite chase themes in the game, but its creepy vibe fits perfectly with it. If we lose all of our health to Specimen 11, we are taken to the Meat Hallway, as it's known, which is a reference to SCP-106 from the SCP Foundation, who has a pocket dimension similar to that of Specimen 11's Meat Hallway. We're then forced to walk through the hallway until we reach a dead end where Specimen 11 kills us. So this specimen is at the number 2 spot because he is just awesome in so many ways. Sure, he may be another floater, but his design, chase theme, chase gimmick, and introduction area are all key factors to why he is my second favorite specimen in the original game story mode. I really have no beef when it comes to this guy. He's pretty near perfect in my opinion. Just be careful next time you visit a McDonald's or an Arby's. You never know what you might find. And that means the number 1 spot on this list belongs to... You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you? That's right, Specimen 6, aka Ben the Merchant, takes the crown for the best specimen in the original game of Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion. If you've been following my channel for a while now, then this probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. But if you didn't know, well, now you do. Ben is my favorite specimen in the entire game by a long shot, and there are so many reasons why. The first of those reasons being his design and appearance. Believe it or not, he's actually a 3D model, but inside a 2D sprite, which I think is pretty damn clever. He resembles a wooden life-size puppet that hangs from strings and carries a needle in his hand. And he won't move, unless we happen to look away from him. Specimen 6's mechanic is the one that trips most people up when they first play the game, since the previous specimens you encounter before meeting Specimen 6 just have a simple run-away mechanic. But here you have to face your fears, and stare at Ben's beautiful bald self or else he'll move closer to us and possibly attack. This particular mechanic is based off SCP-173 from SCP Containment Breach, where the player must maintain direct eye contact with it at all times, or else. Specimen 6's mechanic is also based on the Weeping Angels from the TV series Doctor Who, which only move when not being looked at. This mechanic frightened me when I first played the game, as I had never experienced such a unique mechanic before in a video game. But over time, I started really getting the hang of it, and now it's pretty easy to manage. When we aren't looking at him, Specimen 6 will move closer to us by making clicking wooden puppet noises.
Don't you play with your puppety parts!
But what I find creepy about Specimen 6 in this version of the game, compared to HD Renovation, is that here, he will always be looking directly at us. The fact he's constantly looking at us no matter where we go really adds to the creepiness of him and the overall experience. But in HD Renovation, he sadly won't do that, and he'll just be staring in awkward places, including at the wall while contemplating his life choices, or even admiring the scenery. Ooh, pretty light. Specimen 6 has 4 different facial expressions and poses that can randomly appear each time we look at him. But the most disturbing one is this one, which resembles an angry expression. This leads me to the next reason why Specimen 6 is at the top of this list, and that's his reference. He's based off the Happy Mask Salesman from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where the Happy Mask Salesman himself has a somewhat disturbing smile that can turn into a terrifying angry face under certain circumstances. And that's exactly what Specimen 6's facial expressions represent, although the different expressions are just randomized here. Specimen 6's backstory is also one of my favorites in the game, and it's a direct reference to Majora's Mask creepypasta, Ben Drowned. The story behind Specimen 6 reveals that he was once a puppeteer who tragically drowned in the river after trying to save his handmade puppets, whom he referred to as his children, due to other shops losing business and becoming jealous, and then decided to throw all the puppets into the river. But sadly, the puppeteer never returned from the water. So now, this puppeteer has returned in the form of a wooden puppet and wants revenge for what happened to him. If Specimen 6 happens to kill us, we witness the most gruesome death scene in the entire game, where we see him taking his needle and slowly bringing it closer to our eyeball, turning us into one of his puppets. This death scene is my favorite in the game, and for a good reason. It's pretty disturbing, but still maintains a cartoonish appearance, which is exactly what you would expect in a cutesy horror game like Spooky's. His chase theme is also my favorite in the entire game. It sounds like something you'd hear in a Zelda game, but even creepier. And out of all the chase themes in the game, his has always been the one that I listen to the most. So there you have it, my favorite specimen in the OG version of Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, Specimen 6. I know many people out there might disagree, and I completely understand that. He can be quite cheeky and tough to manage sometimes, as he can appear inside the walls. But for me, this specimen is my favorite in the game, and he's always welcome to chase me anytime he'd like. But one thing is certain, he won't be poking my eyeballs out anytime soon. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this ranking of all 13 specimens in the original game story mode. What do you think of this list? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? How would you rank these specimens? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion content. As always, thanks for watching, and happy gaming!